welcome to my mid-year book freakout tag. Haven't done a lot of these over the years, but I figured, well, why not? There's still a week left in June, so I'm like a touch early filming this, but I'm also trying to like get most of my July and August videos filmed before I move in July. So we're gonna go ahead and do this. I've read 49 books so far this year, out of my goal of 100, so we're basically at about the halfway point. I don't think there's an original for this tag floating around anywhere anymore. I think that's been lost to time, potentially years ago. And no one ever seems to tag anyone or be tagged in this. It's just kind of something we all collectively do around June, July. So let's get into it. As always with my tags, my laptop is in my lap, so when I'm awkwardly looking down, that's what I'm doing. I'm blind, so I can't have it further away than that. The first question, what is the best book you read so far in 2022? I have 4 5-star reads this year, but I picked one. Guest House for Young Widows, Among the Women of ISIS by Azadeh Moaveni. This is a nonfiction book about 13 different girls and women who all joined ISIS for various reasons, different motivations. It just kind of takes a deep dive on who they were as people. She interviewed as many of them as she could to get like as many perspectives as she could, and just like it's just a deep dive on why women joined ISIS, like why they voluntarily joined, why they joined not voluntarily, involuntarily. Just like a bunch of different situations, like from different countries, some girls from Germany, some from the UK, some from various places in the Middle East, some from Syria itself. Like, it's just a really interesting look. It's really well done. Like, if you're interested in this kind of thing, I would highly recommend it. It was really, really wonderful. The second question is the best sequels you've read so far in 2022. I don't read many sequels. Most of the books I read are standalones, so I had very little to choose from, and I went with Concrete Rose by Angie Thomas. This is the prequel to The Hate You Give, which I think close enough to a sequel. It was the most enjoyable book I read that was not a standalone, so I think it counts. I love this. Like, Angie Thomas is just a great writer. Like, this book could be a standalone. Like, this book could exist without The Hate You Give, which I think for contemporaries that are connected, I think that's kind of like where the bar is, because I really don't like when they continue stories just for the sake of continuing stories. But this was just fantastically well written. Angie Thomas, great writer. So I don't really know what to say about it. It's about Star's father. She was the main character in The Hate You Give, and it's basically about him growing up, coming of age, becoming a teenage father twice over, and dealing with like gang violence and trying to provide for his family again as a 17-year-old trying to get through high school. It's a really wonderful book. Question 3, new release you haven't read yet but want to. I tried really hard to find answers to all of these questions, but I couldn't. I don't keep up with new releases. There are pretty much 2 thriller authors I like who both have a book a year. One comes out in the beginning of the year, one comes out later in the year. The one that came out in the beginning of the year, I've already read, so I can't use her. That was Lisa Gardner's new book. It was like One Step Too Far or something like that. I'll include it here, but I already read that, so I can't count it. I did look, but there's just like, I don't keep up with new releases. Like, I read things that are years and years old, and even if something new does come out, I usually don't pay attention to it for like a long time. I'm sorry. Question 4, your most anticipated release for the second half of the year? I do have an answer for this, and that is Girl Forgotten by Karin. She's the other thriller author I keep up with who does a book a year. This is the sequel to Pieces of Her, which, to be honest, I don't remember loving. I much prefer her like detective thrillers to her psychological thrillers, but I will still read it. I will still enjoy it. Karin Slaughter at her worst is still so much better than pretty much any thriller author at their best. So looking forward to that one. Don't know if I'll be reading it as soon as it comes out because, again, I don't keep up with things, but like later this year, early next year probably. I literally just read her book that came out last year like a few days ago. Question 5, your biggest disappointment. And for this, I would like to reiterate, the biggest disappointment does not mean worst book. Those are two very, very different things, very, very different feelings, because this book I did enjoy. I thought it was a fine book. I gave it 3 stars, but it was my most disappointing read. And that was Rodham by Curtis Sittenfeld. This is an alternate history book about Hillary Clinton. It basically takes the stance of what would have happened if Hillary and Bill had not gotten married, if she turned him down and continued on with her life. Interesting premise. I was really looking forward to it. I read American Wife by Curtis Sittenfeld the previous year. That's basically a fictionalized version of Laura Bush's life. She was President Bush's first lady in the early 2000s, and that was really well done. She did great with the character development of Laura Bush, or like the fictionalized version, her name was Alice in the book. And I was really looking forward to that here, like the same deep dive into this character and just like who Hillary was. And it was kind of a disappointment in every way. It didn't feel like it was a deep dive into the character at all. She had very little personality, and I don't know, I was just so disappointed by it. It didn't do anything. It didn't really stretch from reality too far. It felt like a summary of her political career more than anything. It stuck very close to reality, and not in like an interesting way, but just in a like, we're summarizing the Hillary Obama campaign of 2008, which we all watched. I don't need a fictional summary of it. If I wanted that, I'd go read a nonfiction deep dive into it. So I don't know. For how high my expectations were, 3 stars for this book was a little bit soul crushing. Question 6 is your biggest surprise, and I have Forward by Abby Wambach. She was a soccer player on the US women's national team for a very long time. She was one of the stars. She was a forward. She scored a lot of goals. I was growing up right at the perfect time to like be into her. I was just like a touch young for Mia Hamm and that generation. Like, I definitely remember the tail end of it, but Abby Wambach was more of like the right time for me. So I was super into her growing up. I didn't have like many expectations for this book. I kind of thought it would be a generic sports memoir, you know, but it wound up being really well written, really insightful and interesting, and she had a lot of things to say. And like, obviously I don't know her, but this book felt very honest and raw in a way that I really, really appreciated. Like, it's not a very positive book, and to be honest, for like half of it, she just talks about how much she hates soccer and wanted to quit, and I was like shook, but also like I understand where she was coming from. It was just like really interesting, and I was kind of expecting to read it and unhaul it and never think about it again, and that hasn't happened. Like, I still do think about it. Like, I don't know, like maybe I'll reread this in a few years. It was just really, really interesting. So I don't know that I would really recommend this book to a lot of people, because I do feel like you have to be into like women's soccer. You have to already care about Abby Wambach to some degree for this to be of much value to you. But for me, it was wonderful. Question 7, favorite new author, debut, or new to you? I had to go with new to me because I didn't read any debut authors. Well, technically, but not a recent debut. MacLean Weir. She wrote the book of Essie. I love this. I read this in January. It was fantastic. Gave it 5 stars. Like, I've never read her before. This is her only novel. So I am slightly offended that I can't read anything else by her because I immediately looked up other things. She has one nonfiction book that I don't remember what it was about, but it didn't super appeal to me. But to be honest, I may be looking into that just to like see. But yeah, this was wonderful. This is, I don't know if it's YA or your adult. It's kind of like that weird, like, it is about teenagers, but it's also like about adults, and it kind of like skates the line a little bit, but I feel like it's pretty solid for either. It's about a family of Christian fundamentalists who have a TV show about their lives, and the youngest daughter is in high school and she gets pregnant, unmarried, no boyfriend, and it's kind of a whole big to-do as they have to like solve the problem, and how she got pregnant is kind of like another mystery, and it's very, very sad. It's very well written. The character of Essie is really well done. There are two other point of view characters as well who are equally well done, but it's just like, I love like behind the scenes stuff and like of like reality shows and everything like that, politics, where it's like you kind of see like how they crafted the image of everything, and it was really, really well done. So MacLean Weir, she writes another novel. I will read it. I just hope she writes one because it's been a few years. Question 8 is newest fictional crush, and I'm just gonna nope out of this question because I can't even begin to come up with anything. Question 9 is your newest favorite character. I'm going to go with Hatsui from Snow Falling on Cedars by David Guterson. This is historical fiction about a murder that happens in the mid-1950s in this small fishing town off the coast of Washington State. It deals a lot with racism against Japanese Americans, kind of following World War II. Really, really interesting, really well done. I love the character of Hatsui, who is the wife of the man who's accused of committing the murder. She was great. She was my favorite character of this book. She was just so well developed and interesting, and she had so much depth to her, and you kind of like, it kind of implied she was going to go one way and it didn't, and she was just like, I don't know how to describe it. She was great. I mean, I don't mean this in like a fandom-y way, just because I don't read a whole lot of fandom-y books, and then even when I do, I don't feel that way about them. So yeah, she was great. I loved her. Highly recommend this book. Question 10 is the book that made you cry, and I have so many for this. Like, I cry at everything. I cry at the drop of a hat. So mostly when it comes to fiction. I don't really cry much at movies or anything, just fiction. I cry a lot at fiction, so I could have gone with anything. Like, literally, was it the last book I finished? Yeah, the last book I finished was a thriller, and that made me cry. So this is the person I am. But I went with Rust and Stardust by T. Greenwood. This is a historical fiction novel about Sally Horner, who was a real person. She is basically, I think, known as like the inspiration of Vladimir Nabokov's Lolita. She was kidnapped by a pedophile when she was 13, and then he was with her for like 21 months before she was rescued. This book just made me like sob uncontrollably at the end. Yeah. But again, I cry at everything, so like I had about like 15 books I probably could have pulled up for this prompt. This is just the one I remembered crying at the hardest. Question 11, a book that made you happy. I went with Still Missing by Beth Gutcheon. This is about a woman whose 6-year-old son disappears without a trace, and he just like months and months go by and there is no sign of like what could have happened to him. Was he lost? Was he kidnapped? Like, no one knows. And it's not a very happy book. I don't read a lot of happy books. So this book made me happy because it was just, I love missing persons cases, and this was one that didn't disappoint. It was really more about the character of the mother than it was like the crime or the mystery or like what happened to the boy. Like, that was an element. It was just a really well done character study of this woman, of this mother. So I would recommend it for that. That made me happy because I do love reading books like that. I love reading books about people who are just like dealing with the aftermath of traumatic situations. And this was so well done. Question 12 is the most beautiful book that you received this year. I have Les Mis by Victor Hugo. It's a very pretty copy. It's also massive. So, I don't know. Like, I like it. I don't buy a lot of pretty books because most of the books I buy are used. And then question 13 is, what books do you need to read by the end of the year? I don't really know. I picked up Lord of the Rings because I've never read these. Well, I read Fellowship when I was in school for a class, but I never like finished the series, so I have to go back, reread Fellowship, and then read the other two and read The Hobbit. So I just picked these because I do obviously need to read them. I don't know that I actually will read them this year because I'm exceedingly lazy and I kind of like just pissing everyone off by not reading Lord of the Rings. It amuses me, but I do need to read these at some point, and I couldn't think of anything else that was really like desperately need to get done this year. So that was my mid-year book freakout tag. I answered most of the questions, so I assume that's a success. Obviously not tagging anyone, but as always, thank you for watching, and I will see y'all again soon.